Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bio with Mr. Brown. Today, we will be discussing cellular respiration, which falls in line with our Unit 3, Lesson 3 guided notes. So, before we get into this video, please make sure you have your Unit 3, Lesson 3 guided notes in front of you, as well as something that you could take notes with, like a pencil or a pen. Once you have all of that, let's begin. As previously stated, we will be discussing cellular respiration today. During our lesson, you will be learning about how organisms take glucose and produce energy. This can be a pretty complex topic to learn about initially, but if you take the time to practice and learn this information a little bit every day, I promise you it will click. Besides, you've already learned some of the terminology you're going to need to succeed in this lesson when we discussed photosynthesis in Unit 3, Lesson 2. So please utilize some of those notes in case you're having trouble with any of the material. Before we dive into cellular respiration, let's take a look at how it's similar and different to photosynthesis. In cellular respiration, our products are glucose and oxygen, and carbon dioxide and H2O are our products. In photosynthesis, remember that carbon dioxide and water react with light energy and are going to produce glucose and oxygen. So the processes are direct opposites but involve the same molecules. When it comes to cellular respiration, there are a couple of big questions that we must first ask ourselves. And please make sure you're writing down the responses to these questions in your guided notes. When it comes to cellular respiration, all living things undergo cellular respiration because all living things are made up of cells. And cellular respiration refers to the process that releases energy from food in the presence of oxygen. So turning glucose into ATP. And remember, ATP is nothing more than energy. And this is always going on in cells. If a cell is not producing ATP or undergoing cellular respiration, they are deemed as dead. And this is happening in the mitochondria of the cell. There is a step in cellular respiration that does not happen in the mitochondria, and we'll talk about that later. On this slide, we have the equation for cellular respiration. In your guided notes, please write the chemical formulas on the lines provided for you. The names have already been given. You might also want to label the reactants and the products in your guided notes as well. Please pay close attention to how the cellular respiration equation is the opposite or inverse of the photosynthesis equation. In cellular respiration, we have glucose and oxygen as our reactants, but in photosynthesis, remember, glucose and oxygen were the products. And the products of cellular respiration, energy, carbon dioxide, and water were all the reactants during photosynthesis. Since majority of cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria, it's important to understand what they are and their purpose. Mitochondria are membrane-bound organelles that help regulate energy. Cells need mitochondria because they help metabolize glucose or food into energy. Cells that have mitochondria include our prokaryotes, the eubacteria and archaebacteria that we learned about way back when, and different types of eukaryotes, animals, plants, fungi, and protists. These may seem like every type of cell, and that's because every cell undergoes cellular respiration and needs mitochondria. On this slide, you will also see a diagram of a mitochondria. Please take some time to label the diagram accordingly, pausing the video if needed. Now that we talked about what cellular respiration is and where it occurs, we can finally get into the steps that make it up. Cellular respiration is comprised of three steps, the first being glycolysis. Glycolysis essentially means the breaking of glucose. This occurs in the cytoplasm of a cell, which is outside of the mitochondria. In glycolysis, one glucose molecule is broken down into pyruvic acid, releasing ATP and NADH. This is an anaerobic reaction. The input molecules are going to be one molecule of glucose and two molecules of ATP. We have to use two energy molecules in order for glycolysis to happen. The output is going to be two pyruvic acid molecules, two NADH molecules, and four ATP molecules. Our net ATP that we want to take note of is going to be two ATP molecules. Even though we received a total of four from glycolysis, since we have to use two ATP to kick off glycolysis, we're only going to say we had a net of two ATP total. The image shown on your screen shows what is happening during glycolysis. During glycolysis, a glucose molecule is going to come in and be transformed by energy carriers within the cell and produce two ATP, two NADH, and two pyruvic acid molecules. The next phase, or stage two of cellular respiration, is referred to as the Krebs or citric acid cycle. It happens inside of the mitochondria, specifically the matrix. It is going to involve the product of glycolysis, pyruvic acid, being broken down and releasing NADH, FADH2, and ATP. This is an aerobic reaction. The input is going to involve taking those two molecules of pyruvic acid that were produced during glycolysis and transforming them into two molecules of acetyl CoA. Those two molecules of acetyl CoA are going to jumpstart the Krebs cycle. Pyruvic acid does not enter the Krebs cycle. It is transformed into acetyl CoA, which enters the Krebs cycle. The result of the Krebs cycle is the production of two ATP molecules, six NADH molecules, and two FADH2 molecules. Our net production of ATP are two molecules of ATP. This image shows what is happening during the Krebs cycle. We have pyruvate being transformed into acetyl CoA, which enters into the Krebs cycle, and then that gets transformed into our NADH, FADH2, which will then go on to power the third step of cellular respiration. And we also have the creation of ATP during the Krebs cycle as well. The final step in cellular respiration is referred to as the electron transport chain. Like the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain is going to happen inside of the mitochondria, specifically inside of the inner membrane space. The electron transport chain involves molecules of NADH and FADH2 donating their electrons. Those electrons are going to move down a chain of proteins, and as they do, the proteins are able to pump hydrogen ions into the inner membrane space of the mitochondria. Eventually, this leads to a buildup of hydrogen ions, which will flow back into the mitochondrial matrix with the help of a protein, and water will be produced as oxygen continues to accept electrons and protons from NADH and FADH2. The input for the electron transport chain are going to be oxygen gas, 8 molecules of NADH, and 2 molecules of FADH2. The output or the products from the electron transport chain are going to be water vapor and around 28 to 32 molecules of ATP. Our net ATP production is going to be around 28 to 32 molecules of ATP as well. Within this image, you are able to see how NADH and FADH2 donate their electrons to kick off the electron transport chain. You also are able to see how oxygen accepts the electrons at the end to produce or aid in the formation of H2O or water. In this image, what we see is all of our hydrogen ions that have been pumped into the inner membrane space start to flow back into the mitochondrial matrix through ATP synthase. ATP synthase is going to use those hydrogen ions to help form all of the ATP that we are going to produce during the electron transport chain. So, as a quick recap, in cellular respiration, aerobic cellular respiration, we have glucose and oxygen coming into the cell. And as a result, we're going to have around 32 ATP in water coming out. Those are going to be our products of cellular respiration. This slide shows an image that's encapsulating everything we have talked about when it comes to cellular respiration. By now, we should know that cellular respiration involves taking food and oxygen and creating energy. We know that it kicks off or starts with glycolysis, which is the breaking down of glucose to create pyruvic acid. And pyruvic acid is then converted into acetyl CoA that enters into the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is going to produce two products, FADH2 and NADH and ATP, and that's going to go into the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain is going to produce our water vapor as well as our big amount of ATP that is going to help give our cell the energy that it needs. When it comes to cellular respiration, there are certain steps that require oxygen and there are some that do not. Within our notes, we designated these types of steps into two parts. We had those that were aerobic respiration, and aerobic respiration means that they are processes that require oxygen. The majority of cellular respiration is aerobic because it's going to require oxygen in the mitochondria. And these two steps that require oxygen specifically are the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain is going to be what uses the oxygen in the end to create the water for us. And then we also have anaerobic respiration. And anaerobic respiration is a process that does not require oxygen or can be performed where there is no oxygen present. In summary, anaerobic respiration is respiration that does not involve oxygen. Aerobic means oxygen, ana means against, so against oxygen. We still are going to start off anaerobic respiration with glycolysis. Glucose is still going to go in and be broken down, only except oxygen is not present, so we are not going to go along with the regular steps of cellular respiration. This is going to lead us into two potential pathways happening, either alcoholic fermentation or lactic acid fermentation. Remember, anaerobic respiration is a process that does not require oxygen or can be performed where little to no oxygen is present. The first anaerobic respiration process that we talked about was glycolysis. And glycolysis happens within the cytoplasm of a cell and does not need oxygen. It just needs glucose. If an organism has enough oxygen, then the cellular respiration process will proceed as normal. That pyruvic acid will be made and enter into the Krebs cycle. If not, a different process will take place. Like mentioned on the last slide, if an organism in an area has no oxygen, not enough oxygen, or a buildup of the products in glycolysis, and it needs a quick energy, then it will go into a process known as fermentation. In fermentation, the product is usually a small amount of NAD plus as an energy source rather than a lot of ATP. Fermentation is just meant to quickly produce energy, not to sustain the cell. There are two types of fermentation, and they get their names from the products that they produce. Lactic acid or lactate fermentation is usually done by fungi and bacteria. Humans, we can do it as well, specifically when we engage in high energy or high stress workouts or we're running. And so our body is trying to produce ATP because we've exhausted all the ATP within our cells. And so this is a quick method of getting ATP, but we still have to go aerobic respiration because the ATP that's generated from lactic acid fermentation is not enough to supply our whole body with. Another type of fermentation is alcoholic fermentation, which is usually done by yeast and some bacteria. The main product from alcoholic fermentation is alcohol, which is ethanol in this case. As a fun fact, humans have been able to introduce bacteria, fungi, and yeast into many of our foods and reap the benefits of fermentation. If you think about yogurt, different alcoholic beverages, kimchi, pickles, they all take advantage of the process of cellular respiration. For instance, bread is made by mixing yeast and sugar. And if the bread rises, that's because carbon dioxide is being produced that allows the bread to create pockets of air to rise. If we take yeast and sugar and mix them up and put it in a closed environment, we probably will get ethanol. And ethanol is the main ingredient within alcoholic beverages. And with that, congratulations, we have reached the end of our Unit 3, Lesson 3 guided notes. Please be sure to do your Let's Learn by practicing at the end of your guided notes to reinforce the skills that we learned within this lesson. If you are having difficulty, please remember to come and see myself, Miss Ray, or Miss Judd sooner rather than later. Thank you and have a great day.